From the CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
TikTok is back, but with strings attached. Christy Gnome promises to curtail CISA, and employees of failed startups represent data theft risk. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have selected from this past week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we're eager for some insight, opinion, and expertise from our returning guest, making his second appearance, Shaun Marion, VP and CSO over at Xcel Energy. Shaun, thrilled to have you back on the show. It's been about 2 years. I gotta ask before we jump into the news, how was your week in cybersecurity?
Mine was great. In this role, sometimes weeks are good, sometimes they're bad. I have to say this was a really good week.
All right, we got to chalk that up on the win column
Mhm.
and just savor that. We're gonna change your mind though, so maybe we got some serious news here. So maybe we'll make it less good. I hope not. I hope it's good. I hope we come with positivity throughout the course of the show, but we'll find out in just a moment. Before I jump into the news, also have to thank our sponsor for today, Vanta. A new way to GRC. Remember, you can join us on YouTube Live. Get in on the comments. Help us shape the conversation that we're having on the show. It's always a pleasure. I already see the chat room is lighting up all of a sudden. I'm seeing happy Fridays all over the place. We got Kevin Farrell, we got David Cross, we got Michael Vinding, and of course, one of our regulars, CCL, is in there. It's a really great crowd. You want to get in there. Never know what's going to be brought up. So make sure you're joining us live each and every Friday at 3:30 Eastern and get in on that chat. Final thing before we jump into the news. I've been promising we're jumping into the news now. It feels like for 20 minutes. Just a quick reminder that Shaun's opinions are his own, not necessarily those of his employer. We've got about 20 minutes, so let's get started. First up here, we got TikTok's Wild Week. Hard to ignore this one. The immensely popular video platform this week became the Schrodinger's cat of social media by being both a thing and not a thing in terms of its U.S. presence. It was shut down last weekend pursuant to a Supreme Court ruling, which was upholding, the constitutionality of a law, but was then restored by President Trump on his inauguration day, Monday. Kind of. I mean, the app is operational now, but it is under a 90-day reprieve, during which time it seems it must find a buyer and possibly must accept 50% ownership by the U.S. government or an American company. All of those particulars kind of murky. We just know there's a brief stay of U.S. execution, at least. So, Shaun, putting aside the politics, one of the most interesting outcomes of last weekend's closure of TikTok was the exodus of, self-titled TikTok refugees. We're stretching the term of refugee very broadly here, but that's what they're calling themselves. And they started to migrate over to apps like Red Note and Lemon 8, two similar platforms that are also based in China. Presumably would have the same data security concerns. Some of these refugees described this as an act of revenge against the government for depriving them of TikTok and knowingly going, even though less safe platforms as a form of protest. I guess this is a new form of cyber risk here. I'm curious, what's your take on all of this?
Yeah, it is a new form. I was thinking when I saw this, because my 4 kids, 2 of which are obsessed with TikTok. Now they're all in their 20s, right? So they make their own decisions. But kind of chatting with them. On one hand, you'd want to educate your populace of the risks of using this, but based on their actions, I don't think some people care. They may not understand, but they certainly don't care. You can see, you can go into Red Note, things like that. I feel like, there's got to be a better way to approach this where they can still use the platform safely. I wonder if the U.S. government were to have 50% ownership, would we have a different take? Not you and I, but would users be like, oh, I don't want the government spying on me? And it's like, it was just a different government. So we'll see. We'll see. For my daughter's sake, I hope that I hope that it sticks around.
I also think this is a product, and I realize if there are national security concerns or something, there's a limit to what you can say. But I also feel like no one to me has made a very convincing case other than China may do something with this data. If there's like no case of being like, here is what they're going to do with it, or here's what they have done with it. Here are the actual harms that have been done. It's all couched in hypotheticals and behind national security briefings that we don't have access to. And I feel like because of that, to a user, it's kind of unfair to be like, this
Yep.
app is not good, but even though we can't tell you why.
It's this very ethereal thing, and it relates very much to like business, when especially dealing with the DoD. This was a gripe I had with them for many years because they put too much of the information on the wrong side of that tear line. and I can't do anything when it's classified. And so it's like you're telling me I might have cancer, but you can't tell me what kind of cancer, or you can tell me, but I can't tell anybody else. You can't tell me how to fix it. So it's like you're not arming me with the information I need. And I think you see the same thing here. A lot of, I say kids, but because I think it's a younger demographic. So maybe they had a Senate hearing. They're not watching C-SPAN. No, my daughters aren't like they don't know, they don't understand. If they understood, would they make a different decision? I mean, some would, probably not all though. So I think there's got to be a better way to do this than just. I will say the last thing on this is I don't think banning fixes it either. Remember when like Chat GPT came out, a lot of companies like, we're going to ban Chat GPT. And before you know it, they're all trying to embrace it because their employees are using various forms anyway. Banning rarely works. There's got to be a better way to work with them and enable a more secure experience.
And of course, Kevin Farrell still holding a torch out for Vine. Kevin, I know that ship has passed, but I'm still with you. I'm a Vine head at heart. Next story here: Christy Gnome promises to curtail CISA. Department of Homeland Security Secretary nominee Christy Gnome stated in testimony before the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee last Friday that if confirmed, she would keep the department out of efforts to combat disinformation and misinformation, and pledged to make CISA smaller and more nimble. She also added that CISA has gone far off mission, which is to hunt and help harden our nation's critical infrastructure. Again, let's try to keep the politics out of this story, but how do you feel about the tightening up of CISA's mandate? And if this was to go through, I'm curious, what do you envision as the repercussions, positive or negative, for cybersecurity?
So they were formed in like 2018. I believe. So you're talking an organization that's 7 years old. To think that they structured it 100% perfect on day one, and there's no opportunity to improve, I think is silliness. I think Jen's done a great job over there. I mean, it's a big task, a tall order. And I think she did a tremendous job. Is there an opportunity to tighten it up and improve? Sure, of course. I mean, they should continually be evolving. I dug into, like, I was trying to understand both sides. I try to make sure I understand both sides of every story. And so I was trying to dig into like the freedom of speech implications here. And what I found interesting is it's not quite as clear cut as even I thought. There's a lot of nuance, and this is where attorneys make their money, and I don't. Do I think it's, I think long term, I think it will be better for us. I think right now you see a lot of the politics coming out that aren't really helpful. But I do think that trying to evolve the organization into something better, whatever that means, I think is a smart move.
Yeah, and the biggest concern I've seen from purely a cybersecurity perspective is what this means maybe for more local outreach that CISA has done in terms of providing resources for educational institutions and stuff like that, like the very small, where that's borderline critical infrastructure, right? Obviously, the mandate for this is, hey, let's protect the oil and gas, let's protect the energy, let's protect the water system. I think everyone's in agreement on CISA should have a mission, or some governmental organization should have a mission on that. It's more of those corner cases of like where we're seeing very tangible good of raising that cybersecurity poverty line, that I'm seeing a lot of concern in kind of conversations online, outside of, the misinformation, disinformation kind of stuff, which has an inherently kind of political component to it.
When I was working my way, various leadership positions and coaching and training, I get a question from a lot of young managers like, well, how do you know like what your scope of authority is beyond what's documented, beyond what your signature authority is? I have the same answer. It's like, you'll figure it out. You're going to push bounds in various places. You're going to push people in various places. And eventually you'll learn kind of what your bounds are beyond what was in any job description. I think it's kind of similar here with CISA. They've got to learn kind of what those bounds are. They're going to reach spots where they're going to get pushback, whether legal pushback or community pushback or whatever. And they got to learn from that and continually improve their team, their mission, their capabilities. So like I said, I think this is kind of natural. I think it's without getting into the politics, I think they could have approached this differently, because it's so much more of a partisan issue. When I think the core thing that they want to achieve, we all kind of agree with. We need to protect critical infrastructure. How they do it, I know there's some nuance to that, and they'll figure it out. But I think going through this will make them stronger.
All right, our next story here: employees of failed startups at risk of stolen personal data. Dylan, Ari, co-founder and CEO of Truffle Security and quite a fascinating researcher, discovered that malicious hackers could potentially buy the defunct domains of failed startups and use them to log into employee cloud accounts. To test the flaw, he bought one failed startup's domain and from it was able to log into ChatGPT, Slack, Notion, Zoom, and an HR system containing social security numbers. He then used former employee emails to take advantage of the sign in with Google option to access the apps. Ari explains startup employees are more vulnerable because startups tend to use Google's apps and cloud services to run their businesses. They're readily available, not hard to set up, etc. Google does have tech in its OAuth configuration called a sub-identifier that should prevent the risk outlined in this research, but only if the SaaS cloud provider uses it. But again, we are seeing a case of legacy vulnerabilities where people forget to neutralize accounts, once they're no longer needed. So, Shaun, I'm curious, how can companies, small and large, protect themselves better, not only with their own closed accounts, but when we're looking into third-party vendors?
Yeah, I found this one to help support me. This was a great story, and I feel bad for the companies that were taken advantage of. But in the security industry, we have all these startups out there trying to tell us what the tech we need to solve these problems, the problems of tomorrow. And are you thinking about quantum? What are you doing about AI and all these things? We need to think about that. There's no doubt. But truth be told, a lot of the times the problems we deal with are basic things. Like they're not the really, really complicated things. They're like asset management, identity and access management. In this case, making sure that you remove emails, legitimate email from accounts that, so you find these attackers that they take the path of least resistance. If you remember back like the old movies, and they would we've breached the firewall, and then it's like that's not life, man. Life is you're phishing somebody or you're taking advantage of a crappy password. Like it's the simple things I think we just need to get really good at. And I won't, without disclosing anything, how many people listening remember Conficker and some of these old those things are still around. Right. So that tells you that some of these basic problems, we're just holistically as an industry, not really good at fixing.
Well, and as Max Tronic says in the chat, it's domain name management, unsexy task, right? It has a lot of big implications. And yeah, I feel like there is that suffering of, you might not have gotten into cybersecurity to do domain name management, but if that's where your biggest risk is, that's what you got to be taking care of.
Yeah, I was chatting with somebody today about this, not about the specific story, but the concept of the unsexy things. The unsexy things are the ones that I think we don't put enough energy into, and not just security, but I'm talking IT, business, and so forth. Business continuity. How many have really good business continuity plans? Some do, I know that, and some not so much, because that's the unsexy stuff. But you got to get the unsexy stuff right.
I was lucky. I cut my teeth in my IT knowledge with a bunch of storage graybeards. So I learned from the people that had the unsexy job why their unsexy job was important. And so I always, I have a deep appreciation for, whether you're DBA or whether you're dealing with domain name management. Those are the people that help if you need them to make the business run, for sure.
Yep, totally right.
All right, before we move on to our next story, I have to spend a few moments and thank our sponsor for today, Vanta. Do you know the status of your compliance controls right now? Right now? We know that real-time visibility is critical for security. But when it comes to our GRC programs, we rely on point-in-time checks. But more than 9,000 companies have continuous visibility into their controls with Vanta. Vanta brings automation to evidence collection across over 35 frameworks like SOC 2 and ISO 27001. They also centralize key workflows like policies, access reviews, and reporting, and helps you get security questionnaires done 5 times faster with AI. Now that's a new way to GRC. Get started at vanta.com/headlines. That's VANTA.com/headlines. All right, next up here, attackers impersonate Ukraine's CERT-UA. Ukraine's Computer Emergency Response Team, CERT-UA, released a report documenting how threat actors use the remote desktop tool AnyDesk to infiltrate their network. These attackers would send connection requests from a compromised AnyDesk account, claiming to do a security audit. CertUA does use AnyDesk for some cyber incident response procedures. They announced this in the disclosure, but said that they always have done this with prior agreement over secure communications channels. So, Shaun, always a little bit of some pie in the face when cybersecurity experts get caught falling for the same tricks as regular people. I'm curious, though, what are your thoughts when you see a story like this?
Yeah, we're still people, right? We still make mistakes. I two points here. One is I don't know the volume of attacks that Ukraine has experienced right now in general, but I think we can all agree they're probably fairly high given what's going on. So they're going to be hitting it from all angles. So is it likely something is going to slip through? Of course. This one seems like one that could have been prevented with some basic checks. If you read through, like they had some checks and balances there that didn't quite play out. So there's obviously an opportunity to improve that. But I will say, if I harken back to what we were talking about with TikTok, the answer here, the knee-jerk response here from a lot of security professionals, like, well, get rid of AnyDesk or shut down remote desktop or things like that. And if you don't need those, yes, absolutely do that. But there are times when you do need them. And if you've got processes for these, like, I'm not saying that's the best answer, but in this case here, I think they could have done a much better job of maybe with some other technical controls or something of just ensuring that if they're going to use AnyDesk, there's a process and a way to do that securely. And as I hate to use the word securely in AnyDesk in the same sense, but you get my point. Like sometimes we have these entrenched processes, and anyways, I read it through. I just thought you guys had some of the right controls to prevent this, and that you just didn't follow them. So kind of egg on your face. Yes, we should be held to a higher standard as security professionals, but it's not it's not that we're perfect. We make mistakes. We're not. We're humans. So I feel for them as well.
Well, and I also appreciate the sunlight, the disclosure in this, in terms of like, yeah, this is not a great look to fall for, remote desktop scheme, but also like this is like communicating about this. And yes, we actually do use this tool. It's not that we don't, and then doubling down on those controls, figuring out where those fell down, whether it was, through human process, or whether it's, something fundamentally more flawed than that, and getting better. I feel like that is ultimately the positive. Yes, bad, like remote desktop hacks, never a good thing. But if we can get better because of it, and we're willing to talk about it, I feel like that helps everybody.
I couldn't agree more.
All right, next up here, Subaru security flaws expose tracking system for millions of cars. A little bit of a long read here, but I think this is a fascinating story. Sam Curry, a researcher with a long history of discovering vulnerabilities in automotive brands, has now revealed vulnerabilities in a web portal belonging to Subaru that allowed him to unlock a car, start its ignition, and reassign controls of those features to a different phone or computer. He also discovered that the portal was able to track the physical movements of a Subaru down to a single parking space in front of any building, with data stretching back a full year. This was occurring within a Subaru feature called Starlink, intended for use by employees at Subaru of America. Subaru stated that the individuals authorized to use the technology receive proper training and are required to sign appropriate privacy, security, and NDA agreements as needed, and that the systems have security monitoring solutions in place, which are continually evolving to meet modern cyber threats. We have a full link to the blog post with the research from Curry, so check those out in our show notes. But Shaun, a couple of different things, I guess, to take away from this story. The first is the granularity of the tracking. Curry said, like I said, to be able to track to a specific parking space many times a day, kind of reminiscent of problems we've seen with AirTag tracking and that kind of stuff. But like, it's a lot harder to replace your car than an AirTag. Then there's the defiant stance of with regards to NDAs and security, which clearly did not work in this case. I'm curious, what are we to take on this?
This is a frustrating one. When I read it, why was my only thought, and I know that from an engineer standpoint, like they're trying to set it up, and I'm assuming, so bear with me here, but they want to make sure they've got the ability to troubleshoot and maybe help support the customer, whatever the case is. So I always try to assume good intent, which I know in my profession is maybe a flaw. But that said, there should have been a common sense discussion of like, how could this be exploited, taken advantage of? Should we be tracking this amount of information? I don't care if you train your team or they have NDAs or whatever the case is. Assume all of that fails. Assume the worst. What happens? And is the worst, is that, can we accept that? Are we going to continue with this? And my guess is, and I'm guessing here, I'm assuming, is that the security team either wasn't involved or was involved and then, told to go away, which we all know happens. And it was just why? It was just like, why? I don't, you buy an AirTag, what the AirTag does, right? You may not understand the intricacies, but as a general user, it's meant to track. You buy a Subaru, do you expect that somebody sitting back at headquarters can track your car to a specific parking lot? I really doubt that. And nobody's reading the fine print. So I just thought this was inexcusable, frustrating. I don't own a Subaru, by the way, but I just thought it was inexcusable. Does make me wonder, okay, Subaru got busted, but I got a Chevy. Are they doing something similar? Do I need to be concerned? And what can I do if they were? I just can't get rid of it. So why is the best response to this?
And also, if you're going to maintain a system like this, maybe hire someone like Sam Curry to say, like, how is this, or put a bug bounty or something on there to say, like, hey, tell us how this is broken so we don't have a horrible headline that says we're exposed the location information to pinpoint accuracy on any Subaru from a desktop, right?
And then maybe even give educate the owner and give them the ability to turn it on or turn it off. Like we do with a lot of our personal data. Like, I don't want to share this. In this case here, I would venture to say that there's probably a way to completely disable it until I, as the user, say, hey, I need help. I want to enable this and turn it on. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's on for 30 minutes and automatically, they could go through all of that. Point being, not telling anybody and just putting it on the car. And I got to find out from Sam that, thank God there's people smart like him, but come on, just why?
All right, our last story of today, and I think maybe this will, maybe we can tie this to the last story here. CISOs gain boardroom traction, but still lack soft skills, according to Splunk. Maybe kind of tying into, hey, the security team maybe gets ignored. Maybe a little better communication could go a long way here. Let's get into the details. Researchers at Splunk, now a subsidiary of Cisco, released a report showing that 82% of security leaders now report directly to the CEO, up from 47% in 2023. And that in general, the two groups are getting along well, especially when aligning on strategic cybersecurity goals and communicating progress against milestones. However, some of the areas where skill gaps are perceived to exist are in business acumen, emotional intelligence, and communication. As expected, the two camps remain distant with regards to a belief that enough money is being or not being spent on cybersecurity efforts. You can guess which side of the divide everyone is on there. But Shaun, do you feel that CISOs and other security specialists should ramp up their business acumen, emotional intelligence, these things they're talking about here? And if so, how do you get that ball rolling?
So full disclosure, I didn't read this before I put a post up on LinkedIn, I think yesterday, day before. It's very much tied. They're not tied. I didn't read this just in case people think I cheated. I have a very specific opinion on this. And yes, I do. I think that there was a time when, as CISOs, we're young from a profession perspective, right? We've been around a couple decades. CFOs have been around forever, CEOs and so forth. We're learning a lot as we go, but there's this tendency, I think, for a lot of the leadership to not understand the security team. So they look to hire a CISO that is technical. You got to be able to talk to them. And there's some truth to that. We need to be able to converse with the security team and have those types of discussions. But truth be told, the biggest value I bring, I've been talking to boards for 10 years and I didn't get it right at first. I've learned, there's been a lot of trial and error. I have learned a lot about how to communicate them, how to, relay risk to them. They don't care about zero trust. Most of them, unless you work for a technical company, they don't even know what that means. So how do I relay to them the importance of zero trust and why we need to make investments there and get support from that from the CFO, CEO, and so forth? I can only do that if I have a degree of business acumen. I have emotional, like those skills are incredibly important. I argue that the days of the technical CISO, they're not over. There are companies that do truly need technical, like deeply technical CISOs. I get that. I know some of them, but by and large, especially the bigger companies, that's not the skills that I was going to say the skills they're looking for. Unfortunately, they're still looking for those skills. But I think once they get them and they put an individual in the boardroom who cannot talk to the board, they start to change their tune pretty quick.
Yeah, George Strasberg, totally backing you up here. Talking to the board is vastly different than talking to peers or people in IT, and you
Yeah.
need to learn that communication, that board specific stuff. And I know there is a lot of I remember I was doing some research for cybersecurity or for the CISO Series podcast, and I came across a Reddit thread of hey, I'm a non-technical CISO or something like that, and there's a lot of like community pushback of like, how could you do your job if you don't come from like a deeply technical background? And again, not saying that that stuff is not needed, and everything is contextual, right? Some organizations, like you said, deeply need that, but just kind of ignoring that there could be any other consideration. I don't feel like that's just the board level. That's not just the leadership level either. That's coming kind of from both sides
Yeah.
of kind of a misalignment on what the actual job is. So I think that's really, I appreciate that perspective.
I'd hit on what CCL said here. So also very different talking to board versus talking to C-suite. I would agree, yes, and I would expand that to say different to talking to your peers, different than talking to your head of cyber ops. Like it's an interesting role, and it has evolved so quickly that a CISO has to be able to talk to all of those groups in very different ways and get the same message across. Like what I look at is like talking about vulnerabilities with my team is something that we're going to have a discussion about. I want to talk about risk, those types of things. The board, or not the board so much, but the C-suite, I'm talking about how do I get the investment to fix those vulnerabilities? Same outcome I'm looking for, but two entirely different discussions. And you have to know how to balance and walk that line. If you don't, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a continual challenge to get what you need to make progress.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, and thank you so much for that, Shaun. That was just truly excellent. Was there a story in the lineup today, or just in the news of the week that you reacted strongly to? A thumbs up or an eye roller, we like to call it.
Maybe like a thumbs up eye roller. I don't know. Maybe it's like a mix. The CISA thing has really intrigued me. TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, so I did whatever. The CISA thing did, because I spent a lot of time just trying to understand the what and the why, trying to separate the politics and all the discourse coming out of out of DC, and understand like, okay, what is my take on this? Because I have a relationship with them. I think there's a lot of good value that comes out. My first take was like, stay out of it. Like they have a clear mission, stay out of their space. And as I read more, I was like, well, maybe there's an opportunity to improve here. I think we can do it better. But there were some eye rollers there, but there was also some like, that's pretty cool as well.
Yeah, definitely something we'll be keeping an eye on and seeing, like if they come out with a super sharp mandate, I feel, and that they can deliver on, even if they're cutting some stuff out that they were doing. I feel like from a cybersecurity perspective, that's a net positive. If it's we're taking away all, like there's a lot that remains to be seen. But I agree with you. There is a path there for making it an even sharper tool for the industry, which would be a net positive. Before we get out of here, Shaun, is there any place on the cyberspace that people can follow you if they are so inclined?
LinkedIn, pretty much it. I dumped all my social media a while back, except for LinkedIn. You can find me there. I took a bit of time off for the new job, but feel free to find me there. Reach out. Happy to interact. And there, I said I put an article up there about my perspective on CISO. Just timing was perfect.
Well, thank you so much, Shaun Marion, VP and CSO over at Xcel Energy. Excellent. We will have to have you back on ASAP, because that was truly spectacular. Thank you so much.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
And thanks also to our sponsor for today, Vanta, a new way to GRC. Thanks to all of our audience today. CCL, George Strasberger getting involved in there. I've also saw Max Tronic, Kevin Farrell, everybody having a good time in there and giving us some excellent points, help make our conversation better. Remember, each and every Friday, you can join us, get in on that chat on YouTube at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. Also, a reminder to join us next Friday, January 31st, for Super Cyber Friday, where the topic of discussion will be hacking the third-party risk management process, an hour of critical thinking about practical tips for reviewing risk. Then we'll have our weekend review show at 3:30 Eastern, so you can register for both and get all the information at our events page at CISOseries.com. In the meantime, you can still get your daily news fix every single day through cybersecurity headlines. Give us about 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. Until the next time we meet, I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.